Okay, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Unlocked podcast, where we are always, as a collective, designing our lives with more intention, more well being, more purpose. And oh, wow, do I have the guest here today that is going to help us to do life and be more intentional with life, especially as we hold so much with our children, with our work, with our lives. Erica Komisar is here to guide us through her work, specifically with parenting. She's a parenting coach, she's an author, she's a psychoanalyst, and is a depth of knowledge and wisdom that I'm so excited for you to not only listen to her here today, but to follow along on her journey of educating us as a collective and making intentional change for future generations. And I know that as myself and all of our listeners, we are here with you, wanting to be very good students and then to bring your ideas out into our practical lives. And I'm really grateful for you being here today, sharing your vision, sharing the ways in which we can do that. So thank you for joining us, Erica. Beautiful. So Erica and I had a chance to kind of talk through how we want to share all of her content and her wisdom with you all today. We're going to start with kind of where are we at as parents, as families, as mothers, as fathers. We're going to talk about the impacts of where we're at and what that's doing to our families and our children. Then we're going to talk about what the vision could be. What's the possibility? Where could we be going? And then what are practical ways in which we can take all of these learnings and implement them into life? So, Erica, can you help us understand how did we get to this place as parents and as families? And I'm talking specifically about things like, we had a gathering yesterday for our 5-year-old son, and we have a 7-year-old son, and we hosted parents and family, and we had a bounce house, and we had all of the things to make a joyful occasion. And one of the things I noticed was that the parents were coming in, we were having conversations about, we're exhausted. We're exhausted. There's exhaustion happening. There's clearly joy happening. But what we hear most often is people are feeling the weight of carrying multiple careers within a family, trying to be really present for their children, trying to do the inner work to heal generational traumas and pains. And we're all kind of coming to the table and holding all of this. I wouldn't say that the discomfort is a bad thing, but I can tell the exhaustion. So can you explain to us, especially with your work and your clients, where do you think we're at? And how are you kind of assessing the things that we're experiencing now in our families?
Well, I think what happened is over the last 75 years, we have adopted a self orientation in society. And that means that we focus more on our own desires and our own ambitions and our own needs. So I think when children come on the scene, it's confusing because we have not been told, young people have not been told that having children requires a great sacrifice, both men and women. It requires a sacrifice from both of them, which means that in the natural order of things, we lend our narcissism, our self orientation, we lend that to our children. So we put it aside for the most part, not fully. I mean, you have to care for yourself. You have to make sure your health is good. You have to make sure the exercise. Um, but the idea that somewhere along the way we told women and men that you could stay on this self orientation path and have children and add them like frosting to the cake and everything would be okay. The reality is that having children is a full time, more than full time job. And so traditionally, women took on that role of that full-time role of caring for children. That didn't mean they did it alone. They had family around, they had support systems, but primarily that was their full-time job. Then we told women that you can have a full-time job outside the home and be in the full-time role of being a mother. And what that did is it caused a great deal of stress, but it also denied the basic reality that that you can't do two full-time jobs at the same time without losing your mind or depleting yourself. So the exhaustion you're talking about is the denial that mothering is a full-time job. Okay. Um, does that mean that mothers can have hobbies when they're working? And so interestingly, your work could be some part-time, much less significant, keep your toe in the door, but not make it a hobby more than, a narcissistic self-oriented pursuit, right? And I think that we haven't told young people that. So when mothers are exhausted, we also haven't told fathers that fathering requires a lot of sacrifice. So fathers who have always felt that they share the financial burden with their girlfriends and then wives before they have children, 50-50, we pay 50-50, everything's 50-50, it's gender neutral, we're all, we're in this, whatever. Suddenly, fathers are faced with the reality that to be a father means to take care of your family and protect your family. And that means that you take on, if you are going to allow that mother to be home with those children and in that full-time role, which children really desperately need to have one parent that is full-time, or for the most part there, then the father has to take on the role of the carer and the protector. And that's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And I think young men also resent women for wanting to stay home with children because they're not willing to take on the sacrifice that they're working harder. They're having to make more money in those years. They're having to be the sole provider. So a lot of the predicament we find ourselves in, although people say, oh, you need two incomes. Well, you need two incomes for lifestyle. You can have one income, but it means having to sacrifice a second car or a bigger house or vacations or new clothes every year. Or, you know, I think the idea is that one of the heads of one of the think tanks said to me, the problem, Erica, is that it used to be that people were satisfied with a 1,500 square foot house and one car that they shared, and they took vacations on the Jersey Shore. And, you know, um, today people want a 3,500, 4,000 square foot house. They want two cars. They want to fly away on vacations. They want to send their kids to fancy schools. They want, so they want to buy new clothes all the time. They want to buy new washing machines. So he was right when he said that to me, because I think as our materialism has increased, as our lifestyle aspirations have increased, our children are the losers. And I would say parents are too, because parents have been basically gaslighted to believe that you can have two working parents working full time and have healthy children. And I think you can try, but you end up exhausted, depleted, and your children end up feeling neglected. And so, yeah, I think the current modern paradigm um, doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Now, you could say maybe the traditional one didn't work for all people either. There were women who probably didn't want to have children and had children because of societal expectations. There were men who didn't want to have children who had children for societal expectations. There are some people who are incapable of sacrifice, and that's okay. If that's the case, then you have a great linear career. You do you. I met a couple the other day and they said, we decided not to have children. I said, I'm not a pronatalist. If you're not prepared to make the sacrifices, then don't have children, because, have wonderful linear careers and build things and create things, but don't have children. And so I think that there's greed too. I mean, I think we're a very greedy society. We want everything and we want to gobble it up and we want it all at the same time. And I think that there is a place, as we say, there's a season in life for everything. There's a season to be a leader in your field as a woman. It's before you have children, and it's when your children are fully grown. And those are the times to be a CEO. And those are a lot of years in your life. But when you have children, particularly when you have small children, those aren't the years to be a CEO because you're not going to raise healthy children. You're not going to be there. You can't be a CEO of a company and raise healthy children. You'll end up raising children who resent you, who are deprived, who feel angry, who have attachment disorders. It's not a one-to-one correlation, but that's what I was seeing in my practice is that as women didn't understand a simple paradigm that you can have it all in your life because we live long lives now, but you just can't have it all at the same time. And you have to make the sacrifices and leave your narcissism at the door when you have young children, like leaving your shoes at the door when you live in New York. You have to leave your narcissism at the door. The shoes aren't going anywhere. When you're ready to pick them up again, when your children are older, they're still
Yeah.
waiting for you.
Now, so much of that, there's so much of a yes in that. And then I know that there are listeners, their egos, and even mine will trigger in listening to you share some of that to say, well, I am a CEO and I have intentional time with my children and my children are doing well. So the ego wants to fight what you're saying because we've been raised to think I can do it all. I'm an independent woman. I can do all of these things. There's no way. But even in that, our work is all about being intentional. So knowing yourself well enough, what you truly want in your life, what you really value, and then designing around that. So what you're saying is if you know yourself well enough to know, I don't want children, you're just designing around that. But if you are choosing to say, well, I want children and I want a career, then you must be accepting of the fact that sacrifices will have to happen somewhere. And likely that intentional choice to say, I'm going to put down some elements of the career right now so that I can be fully present or as present as possible with the children, or there may also be other gives, which I think we're gonna talk about later, which might be partnership, right? There might be sacrifices elsewhere. So even if we think we're
Yeah.
doing it all, there are sacrifices happening no matter what. Would you say that's true? Like, is that what's happening with our
Yeah,
egos?
yes. Yes, and I mean I also think that when you choose a partner, you're hopefully choosing someone who shares a similar value system and a similar vision of life. That's maybe the most important thing. Um, and that you need to think about what your value system is before you get married and make good choices. You also need to, so a lot of the work is work that is preventative work, is work that's done in advance, right? Even the idea of what kind of work do I want to do that will allow me to have flexibility and control in the years that I have children when I want to be with my children and not be working so hard, or maybe not be working at all. And I don't think we do that. I don't think we encourage all young people, men and women, to think that they're going to have linear careers. And we've done that to both men and women. I mean, the concept is even though the research shows that you generally in a lifetime have 6 jobs or careers at least. So the idea that we convince young people that they're going to get on a career track and stay on it is a false narrative because the reality is you can get on a career track, but you have to be flexible enough to step off that career path. And you also have to choose a career. So I went through many iterations of careers in my early 20s trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I really did. I did a lot of internships before internships were a thing. Um, and the reason I did them was because I wanted to see whether those lifestyles suited me, and I knew I wanted to have a family. In my mind, I knew I wanted a family. And I saw how the women worked who would have been my role models. So I tried television production, and the women weren't married and they didn't have children and they worked terrible hours. And as much as I liked the work, I said, that's not the life for me. I was going to go to law school, and I worked in a law firm, and I looked at the way they worked and how they worked and how many hours they worked and that they didn't spend much time with their families. And I said, that's not the life for me. And then I found my way to being a therapist for a variety of reasons, but mostly because I was a very empathic person and it suited my personality, but also because it allowed me the freedom and the flexibility to do my own thing. I could work hard in my non child years. And then when I had children, I could either reduce it or take time off and then come back after. So I think we don't encourage women to think about the kinds of jobs and careers they choose. We just say, you can do it's a very narcissistic message. You can do anything you want and be anything you want. And you can be, it was like how parents used to tell children when they were little, you can be president. No, not everybody can be president, but sort of the narcissistic message, you can do everything all at the same time. And so instead, telling young women, definitely go for the kind of work you want to go for. You want to be a banker, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor. But understand that when you have children, those careers are not going to be warm and fuzzy and friendly to having children. And it's going to make it very hard for you. And you're going to have to be a maverick if you're going to be in those careers. You're going to have to take huge pay cuts. You're going to have to go from making $1 million a year to making $100,000 a year if you're going to work on your own, or 150 or 200. So I don't think we don't educate young people. We don't tell young men that in the years that they have young children, having a primary attachment figure is the best thing for your children, that gives them the greatest chance at being healthy and happy and mentally healthy. And so if we told them that, would they say to their girlfriends, "Well, you better work and you promised me and, we bought this house, I mean, maybe, the idea of prevention, that if your value system is nurturing very healthy children and focusing on family above everything, then you make different decisions about lifestyle, about materialism, about what kind of careers you choose. Yeah, that's what I would say. And we don't do any
Mm.
of that.
We don't talk about the implications. We haven't been raised to think about, yeah, you can do all the things, but there are costs. There are costs and you're choosing the cost consciously or not. And so I think one of the really profound things that I've loved about listening to your content is also the impacts of where we are now and what it's actually doing, not just how we're feeling. Of course, there is stress and there's strain, but I think in not identifying the actual consequences and accepting them and working with them, we are creating some actual physical impacts, even as you've shared in your work, how the brain of our children is changing to react to stress more now with the amygdala growing and the hippocampus shrinking, that we're actually seeing physical changes. And it shocked me so much to hear that, because you would think in today's world where, with all things considered, we have it pretty easy compared to where they were when they were trying to have to hunt for their food, and they didn't always have, humans didn't always have shelter and they still had to care for their children. Nowadays we can order Uber Eats and we can, go to the grocery just a minute down the road, and we have so many luxuries. What are these impacts and why are we experiencing them? I guess is more the question, specifically, I think, when it comes to stress.
Well, so understanding the consequences of our actions is a big part of emotional maturity. We say that the prefrontal cortex stops growing at around 25. By 25, you have more perspective, better executive functioning, hopefully better judgment, and more of a concept of the bridge between actions and consequences. What I'm finding is that young people are developmentally immature, are emotionally immature, in that they don't even though they pass through the 25-year marker. Um, Maybe on an emotional level, we have protected young people from developing emotionally, protected them from the ideas of responsibility and sacrifice, and we did this as parents and grandparents and great grand. I mean, this has been going on for 75 years. So the younger generations are suffering because we have really denied them access to such an important part of their emotional development. So, if you think that the understanding that infants are meant to be protected evolutionarily and biologically from stress, they are meant to be worn on their mother's bodies for the first year because technically human beings are born about a year too soon. 9 months is what the theory is that we're born incredibly neurologically fragile, not resilient. And we're born so early because our heads got too big to go through the birth canal, but also as infants go, they would kill the host if they stayed in their mother's bodies another year. So, but they're born almost like marsupials, like kangaroos or wallabies, right? Where you're meant to be worn on your mother's body to keep the stress levels down, to keep the stress activity in your brain very, very low. And then after a year, just incrementally, slowly, the baby's exposed to frustration and little incremental bits of stress to build a psychic immune system. That's not what we're doing. Again, gaslighting young people, telling them babies are born resilient. Anybody, any old caregiver can do. Quality time is fine. Give your baby to daycare. They'll be fine. They're resilient. No, babies are not resilient. They are fragile. They are vulnerable. They, in those 3 years, it's called a critical period of brain development, 0 to 3, where by 3, 85% of the right brain is developed. um, you are basically your calm and loving and sensitive, empathic, physical and emotional presence is what helps to architect that baby's social emotional brain. And that's the brain that they're going to live with for the rest of their lives. That's the part of the brain that um, develops certain important characteristics of human beings. Emotional regulation, the ability to regulate your emotions. So, what we're seeing today is depression and anxiety and ADHD, all the inability to regulate emotion. We see stress disorders, anxiety, and that has to do with the fact that we've turned on the stress regulating system far too early because of this perception that babies are like us. They're not like you. They're infants. They're neurologically, physically, and emotionally fragile. Um, and so I think, you know, we basically have told young people that there's no consequence to treating infants and toddlers like they're adults. And there are great consequences because once you architect that brain, it's very hard. Although the brain is plastic, it's very hard to repair a lot of the damage that we do in that period of time when we're neglecting our babies. So, you know, it doesn't mean it's not possible to repair. There is some repair you can do, but it's not all repairable. So it's important to remember that first 3 years, you are literally architecting the right brain of your baby, the social emotional part of your baby. That's how important it is for you to be there. I have people come up to me at cocktail parties and say, I didn't want to be there in the first 3 years because it didn't look like anything was going on. They were just sort of sleeping and pooping and eating and just didn't, it felt like I wanted to be around when they could talk to me. And I blow a gasket inside, not outside. Because as a therapist, I say, I hear you. Let me educate you. So I end up being the person at the cocktail party. Suddenly 20 people are surrounding me and I'm doing a mini course on the neurological development of infants and toddlers. We should teach this stuff to young people so they know what's at risk, that the decisions they're making are often permanent decisions that will alter the personality of that child going forward.
I can only feel the maybe heartache of some listeners, right? Who are in myself. I'll just speak for myself. I mean, we designed our lives to be present with our children, our 2 boys as they were being born because we knew we wanted to be here with them. Both my husband and I. But even in listening to you speak about those first 3 years, I think, "Oh, did I do enough? Was I present enough?" And I can only imagine the heartache of listeners as they're feeling maybe, "Oh, those first 3 years are over for me." Maybe they're long gone. Maybe I have teenagers or entering into those teen years. And
So I wrote another
yes, oh,
book,
please.
and the other book, which so the publishers give the books the title. So the original title of my first book, which is now called Being There: Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. The original title, which I loved, was called The Lost Instinct. The second book, the original title, was called Second Chances. They named it Chicken Little: The Sky Isn't Falling: Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. That is the book about the second critical period of brain development, which is 9 to 25, where parents once again have a tremendous opportunity to alter the outcome for their children by being as present physically and emotionally as possible. So we say you can repair it. The sooner you get to it, the easier it is to repair, the more you'll be able to repair. And so don't wait till adolescence to repair it. If you're listening and your child's 3 and you go, "Oh shit, I forgot, I didn't know these things." The sooner you get to a tear, a rip in a fabric, the greater the chance you can darn it or fix it or sew it, right? As opposed to letting it get wider and wider, right? And so, yeah, but adolescence is a second period where you matter a lot and you can do a lot of repair in terms because the brain is once again incredibly plastic and changing and
And
growing.
just to say it, I'm thinking about our listeners, and I'm thinking just to say it out loud, you're listening to this podcast and you're in our community, so it's likely that you did so much presence in the younger years that the repair is gonna be a little easier. And I also want to paint the picture of what are we working toward, Erica? What is the vision? What is success? What would we say as parents that we're aiming for? Are we aiming to create emotionally stable children? Are we aiming to create, a healthy familial bond? Emotional maturity? Are we resilient children? What can we consider as success no matter where we are, whether pre-children, in the midst of the infancy stage and toddler stage, or in adolescence? What vision should we have in front of us right now that helps us to say, like, how what are we designing around?
So the vision isn't of perfect children and it's not of perfect parents. It's of resilient children. It's of emotionally healthy children. It's good enough. And we're not even close to good enough in society. The other thing is that I will use an old adage that still remains true and always will. A parent is only as happy as their least happy and healthy child. And so by putting yourself first and not your children first, it may feel good in the moment, meaning you may get the immediate gratification and the narcissistic pleasure of doing what you want, when you want it, with whom you want it. Mm. But in the long run, if your children suffer because of that self orientation, then trust me when I say you are not going to be very happy. So there is something called the marshmallow test. It's an old standard piece of research. If a child is given one marshmallow, they take it. But if you say to them, if you wait, you can have two. And in the old days, many, many children will wait for the two marshmallows. They would learn to wait. for narcissistic gratification, for immediate gratification and pleasure, right? Today, I would pretty much guarantee that most children do not wait for the second marshmallow. They take the marshmallow in front of them, and I think that's what parents are doing. They cannot delay their gratification in their careers, with their material desires, with their freedom of time, and so yeah, and so they take the one marshmallow, and then their children suffer. And afterwards, I bet they're wishing they had waited for the second marshmallow.
This is interesting as I think about what we can practically do now as parents, as leaders, as, organizational leaders, community leaders, just and mothers and fathers. We're constantly shared the message of you have to fill your cup in order to take care of others, to take care of your children. So you need to be well yourself in order to take care of your children. Then we're also shared this message of, like, do everything for the child, center the child, make sure they're involved in all the activities, that they have there's so many dress up days at school. There's endless birthday extravaganzas that we're planning, and so we're centering the child in a very unique one marshmallow kinda way, I feel like, and I don't think that's what you're saying. So I'm curious about how we can think about how do we take care of ourselves and not lean into narcissism and only prioritizing ourselves? And then on the flip side, how do we ensure we're kind of positioning the child in the right way, that we are centering them, but we're not centering them in the ways that are going to make them want to take the marshmallow, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, I think the idea is that there's a lot of focus today on immediate gratification, on materialism. Um, you know, the idea that parents work really hard to I mean, I'll just use your example, to have a big fancy birthday party at a fancy birthday party place, to compete with other parents who had it there too, as opposed to really focusing on the relational aspect of having one or two friends and having a picnic in the park and playing duck duck goose. And I think our value system is really a little bit warped, to be honest. And I think that's affected parents and the choices that they make, and it ultimately affects children. It's okay to set limits with children and tell them that they can't have a big birthday party because you can't afford it, or that you're going to have a small and intimate and relational birthday party. That they don't need to have new sneakers and new clothes every year, that it's okay to take hand downs, and that way you have more time with mommy. Because if we were going to get new sneakers and send you to fancy camps, and that means mommy would have to work. And for mommy to work, that means I would be away. If you gave children the option of either having you there or going to a fancy camp and wearing fancy sneakers and going to Disney World, they would take the time with you. And I think that so adults are making very strange decisions on the behalf of children, when they don't really understand what children actually need.
It's really interesting, and it almost makes me wonder, if we pose how many people would pose that question to their child, and like you're saying, they would choose the time and the presence, and often I hear people say, "I'm balancing a very demanding career, and I have to have the career in order to take care of my family and provide for my family. So, I'm going to be present with my children, but I'll be present for 10 minutes, and I'm just gonna focus on the quality of 10 minutes instead of the quantity." So as you Go ahead.
Maybe maybe defining what it means to take care of your family. I mean, if we're talking about a single mother who's paying $1,500 a month in rent and has to work her fingers to the bone to be able to pay her rent and to be able to feed her children, that's quite a different experience than someone saying, "Well, I have to work. We both have to work full time so we can, have this really super nice house, and so we can take nice vacations and send them to good schools and live in a particular neighborhood and buy them nice things." And so I think we have to really redefine what it means to give children a good life. Because what it actually means is as much love and attention and time with your children as possible. And that means that quality time is a myth, it's a ruse. It was used to get more women into the workforce as quickly as possible. It was created by the feminist movement to create as many women into the workforce as possible and to keep them there. It was an economic it was based on the economics of parenting, not on the emotional, mental health, and relational health of children. It wasn't based on children at all. It wasn't based on parents at
Yeah,
all.
it wasn't based on, the well-being of the family, and I think what you're
No, it was based on the
yeah,
economics.
and what you're
Yeah.
saying is the repositioning of how we look at what's best for our families and how we be intentional about what will make our family environment well. And I wanna make sure we hit on this because it's not always about it working out perfectly, like you said, there's not perfect. And there are instances where the intentional design of a family actually requires separation. Right? That sometimes the practical nature of figuring out how to make everything work, that separation is required in terms of, a partnership. And I know that you have some work on divorce coming up. So can you talk a little bit to that and tie that into all of
Yeah.
this?
Well, I mean, so one thing is that divorce is at 50%. So that's a very high number. One in two couples divorce. And what we know is that the nuclear family, that includes the extended family, is still the best environment to raise children in. All the research points to the fact that children do best when they have a mother and a father and live in a nuclear family. But the research shows that that nuclear family has to be a loving one. And so, once again, we're talking about the choices you make. How is it that one in two couples divorce? It probably means that those couples did not understand how to make good choices from the start. Because people don't, I mean, there are breakdowns, people have mental breakdowns, but in general, people don't change. So, how is it that the person that you decided you were going to spend your life with is now someone who you hate? And children don't understand this. They say, how could you have chosen each other if you hate each other so much? Right. So I think we have to do better in terms of the choices we make. Again, remember I said that the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain where it determines things like good judgment and making good choices and understanding consequences. And so, I mean, that's the first piece is that we have to make better choices before we choose who we're going to have a family with. And then work damn hard at seeing if that relationship is at all repairable and give it our all. And then if it's not, and that child is going to live in intractable conflict, the research shows that it's better for a child to live peacefully between two homes than to live in an environment with intractable, unresolvable conflict with two parents who don't love each other. So I have a book coming out in less than a year on how to raise children to be healthy and resilient through the divorce process and what you need to sacrifice as an individual to make sure that your child is healthy, because that's really it, is that people going through divorce also get into a lot of narcissism and self-orientation where it's all about them and their needs and their desires and what's fair to them, and they're not thinking about their children, they're thinking about themselves. So first and foremost, again, you know, the Buddhists say when we leave our egos at the door, I guess you could say to be egoless is to be the best parent, is to be egoless. And that's not what's happening today across the board.
No, and I can feel it and I always use myself in our situation because I know it's important to share the realness, right? That in theory, the ideas are good, but in practice, they're hard also, right? But this is where the resiliency comes in, right? That our egos are going to pop up, but in listening to your words, to your wisdom, and following along in what you're sharing, you help us bring light and mirror to that ego and to keep it in check and to keep working on. As I'm listening to you, I feel like I'm taking away so many wonderful ideas and practical ways in which, I can become even more egoless and less narcissistic and more present for our children, and just continue the intentional work and be thoughtful about how we're showing up day in and day out and always growing and evolving. So I want to invite everyone who's listening to follow along with Erica. This is just like the surface, just the top of the iceberg with Erica's wisdom and wealth of knowledge. Erica, one thing we always ask our guests is where can our listeners find you to follow along, to get that book, but to also, I find so much education and guidance in just following along on your social channels and reading and watching through your papers. Where can they find you and follow along?
So they can go to www.komisar, Komisar.com. That's my website, and you can see a lot of the articles I've written and podcast interviews, and you can also make an appointment with me. But I also started an organization called attachmentcircles.org, which is just getting up and running. It's got an educational platform where a lot of the questions that people write and ask me can be answered. It also has some live forums on it, but most importantly, it's community building. So it's meant to organize on a grassroots level parents who are raising children and share a similar value system to get together in person and form play groups in their towns. And so those are the two ways to reach out to
Phenomenal.
me.
And I know you're out of New York. Do people who would want to work with you, do they have to be in New York, or can they be anywhere? Anywhere.
No, no, they
Yeah,
can
and then
be
the
anywhere.
groups
Yeah.
can, with the circles, they can be located anywhere. The grassroots is so that it's kind of spreading around the world, I would assume, not
Yeah.
just in one area.
All around the world. We're trying to get these play groups to be in person because mothers are feeling more isolated than ever. So that's meant to be in person, but there are also online groups for those people who live in what I call deserts, deserts of connection, where they really live in small towns and they can't find other mothers like them. And, so then we have online options. So
Wonderful. Well, we will make sure that those links are in the show notes. So anyone who's listening, please scroll down and grab those links. Erica, thank you for being here today, sharing what you've shared with us, helping us on our parenting journeys, making us stronger as mothers and fathers and leaders, and helping us to implement real practical change driven by your wisdom. We appreciate you being here.
thank you for having me.